Well, welcome to another Fathers Club podcast. I'm sitting in for Brad, and we're really doing a part two of our last podcast, which was around mental health, behavioral health, and really tackling the subjects that are a big impact to our schools, our homes, and our community. Really speaks to an opportunity. But before we dive in, let me quickly go around and have everybody introduce themselves and who this cast of characters is going to be today, sharing some really good conversation. Scott Green, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Tom. Happy to be here. Scott Green. I have a son who's a senior at Blue Valley and an older son who is a graduate of Blue Valley.
I'm Joe Hildebrand. I have a daughter who's a freshman at Blue Valley Southwest and a sixth grader at Audrey Bend and a fifth grader at Wolf Springs.
I'm Scott Bacon, and I have the honor of serving as principal at Blue Valley High School.
I'm Chris Newlin. I am a council member of Overland Park, Ward 6 down here, representing all the three high schools down here, Blue Valley West, and Blue Valley Southwest. And I have a freshman at Southwest, and I have a sixth grader at Audrey Bend.
Hi, I'm Scott Liggett. We have a junior at Blue Valley West, a senior at Blue Valley Southwest, and three older siblings that are all Blue Valley products.
Great, and I'm Tom Herzog. I've got a freshman at Blue Valley High School, and I got a daughter who graduated a couple of years ago from Blue Valley High School. Let me give you a quick orientation on how we found ourselves here. It was late last year. I remember some invites going out of, hey, we're going to have some fathers getting together, and we're going to have some conversation and dialogue. And quite honestly, looked at my schedule and said, I think I'm busy. But they were persistent, kept getting text messages, other people saying, hey, it'd be really cool if you could come and be there and just listen. And when I saw some of the topics that they were going to talk about, it was the challenges and opportunities of way we can make a difference. Being a community member, I love our community. Having a kid in high school, I wanted to just come and see. And I remember I came in and I sat in kind of the back room because I wanted to be careful not to get any assignments. I just wanted to be able to come in and listen. And it was really amazing, the conversation that began to ensue. And really, that's how we found ourselves to doing something like mental health first aid. We had a couple of the dads stand up and speak after meeting with Principal Bacon and some of the other teachers and talked about the opportunities and challenges that were out there. And some of them are exactly around this topic that we're going to hit head on today. Why we chose one of the toughest topics to go tackle, I don't know. I think maybe we're just stubborn, and we said, let's go do something about that. And something amazing happened a few weeks ago. As we talked about with Dr. White and talked about some of the challenges, and at the end, we led to, we're going to get a group of dads to come together to get mental health first aid certified. And what you're looking at is a group of folks, of dads, who took a Saturday, took 9 hours, and we went back to class. And Principal Bacon, I'll be candid, I was a little nervous because every time I saw you over there, I felt like I needed to raise my hand, or I thought I was going to get a grade, and I was wondering how I was going to explain that to my parents. That's unfortunately some of my connections with principals. So it was a lot of fun. What was really cool is we had some really honest, transparent dialogue. Let me just hit on some of the statistics that are out there. I'll just hit on three of them because we don't want to get consumed with the bigness of the challenge, but want to put some context. This year alone, 1 in 5 people will experience some type of mental health challenge, a crisis, if you will. 1 in 5. We have more than that sitting at this table right here. What's our opportunity to be able to speak into that person's life? I will tell you that 1 in 25, over 10 million people live with some type of serious mental behavioral health challenge or issue. Looking for wellness, looking for recovery in some instances. A fourth of those are diagnosed before the age of 14. Another 3/4 of those are diagnosed before the age of 24. This challenge doesn't know boundaries. It impacts every aspect of community. And today we'll begin talking about the state of the state, if you will, the stigma that surrounds it. I think that was one of the neat things that happened with dads coming together. Men typically don't lean into this topic. It's not a conversation we always want to talk about. Now, if you talk to us about sports, we do. We talk about mindset. We talk about is your head in the game. And really, that's a big part of what this is all about. And most importantly, how do you handle those in a healthy, constructive way? When you're experiencing stress or anxiety or depression, what tools are available and how do you connect to manage your way through those? It's not if those are going to happen, it's when those are going to happen. But before we get into some of that conversation, I'd like to ask Principal Bacon to kick us off. And your perspective, as you are seeing from an educator's point of view, you connect with students and parents all the time. And honestly, we were honored to have you there. It was really cool that you spent the entire day with us there, and I think really encouraged and inspired everyone. And if you could share some of your thoughts of what you shared with us there, that would be really nice.
Sure. Well, Tom, I appreciate this opportunity. I appreciate the opportunity to attend the mental health training as well. And it was very beneficial for me, both personally as a dad myself and as a principal of a high school of 1,600 plus students as well. You know, I think historically, as an educational institution, we've been challenged to help our students achieve and grow beyond what they thought they could do or what they anticipated they could do. And historically, I think we've done a pretty good job of that, and I think we're well equipped to do that. I think over the last several years, though, there's been a realization that there was another element to our job, and that is to nurture the health and well-being of our students. And we very quickly realized that that was a lot more complicated than we originally anticipated. There's a lot of competing interests for our students' time and attention, things such as social media and substance use and abuse. And then we became aware of a growing issue in terms of anxiety, depression, and a tendency towards suicidal ideation. And to be real honest, I don't know that I personally, I'll speak for myself, was well equipped to confront those issues. And it became very, very clear to us in the educational community that this was a community endeavor. We needed the resources of our community to team up with us if we were going to effectively meet the needs of our students in terms of their health and well-being. And so I've been very, very appreciative of how our community has rallied to that cause, and specifically the Fathers Club, in taking on such a challenging topic such as this, because I think we need all the tools, we need all the support, we need the community to work together to address some of these issues.
And I think that was so evident that day. I'll be candid, I was surprised to see all the dads show up. Yeah. I fully maybe had very low expectations. It was on a Saturday. I know this is a tough topic. We had tried once before, but again, we were stubborn enough. We weren't going to not do it. And what was amazing was what the instructors told us, that this was one of the most honest and transparent and authentic classes, and each of them had taught over hundreds of classes that they've ever had. And I think it underscores exactly what you said. Councilmember Newlin, I'd like to hear from you over, you have a community perspective. This has been a topic of conversation in our local government and the various groups that you work with. Can you share your perspective on both what you're seeing and hearing and what you experienced from the state of the state that day?
So I will say that, I think we all know that down in Southwest we had something happen just recently this year, and that really opened my eyes from just even a public servant perspective, what is happening in the community, and talking to our kids of the stresses that they're seeing, whether it's just you as a parent that you're putting on them that you don't realize, you think it's not a big deal, you're just trying to make them better. And then what's the stresses that are happening at school? And what I'm seeing in the community is our parents out there are just trying to figure out the dynamic that's different. I mean, just 20 years ago we went to school, right? That's what most of us graduated, 20, a little more than that.
I'll go with 20.
Right, okay, I know 20 is good for you. I'm maybe a little more than that too, but it doesn't seem that it was that long ago that we were graduating from high school and these things didn't exist around us. And as a community, mental health is coming out further and further prevalent of getting our public safety involved, and getting our government involved. And I think one of the things I'm hearing from the county perspective, and I went to the State of the County address, and one of the biggest highlights that came up was Chairman Eiler brought up the mental health awareness that the county's trying to have. And they really put a big emphasis on that. And that made me feel that this county and the city government really knows that this is an issue and how do we get around it, such as we're on mental health calls. They're sending out an advocate now from the county. I believe we have 6 of them to try to go on every one of those calls so that they have an advocate inside the county to help parents navigate need for either just the one who's having the mental issue at that time. And I think we're starting to see that we need to put money into those types of services, and I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, and I think, we're rethinking everything. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, the thought of having a mental health first aid professional go on scene with the law enforcement office wasn't even a thought. And now today we're saying we've got to do something different. What we've done isn't working. And I think exactly what you talked about with students. Hey, I'm as guilty with any other dad. I like to remind my son of how hard my upbringing. I walked barefoot to school in the snow, 5 miles uphill both ways. The reality is the world our kids are dealing with is far different than we have ever experienced. The number of inputs, far different than what they've experienced. And I would even go as far as say the pressures and the stresses and the visibility of those is different than what we've ever experienced. I'd pass a note in class and it may take a week for that to get around. Today, it's one click of a button for everybody to find out about that. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. And that's exactly what Principal Bacon was talking about with some of the social media pressures that puts out there. I'd like to hear from a couple of the other dads on kind of this awareness thought and the state of the state that you became maybe more context became available through the last few weeks.
I have a teenage daughter, so my eyes have just been open, especially as she just turned 15. And, over the last year, she's a totally different person than what she was. And I have all girls, so that's a challenge for me. And, on my own is to how do I relate with my own girls? Because I'm an outdoors type of person. I grew up on a farm. I'm kind of an introvert. And so for me to just sit down and communicate with my wife and kids and my girls is difficult for me. And so what I've realized is the challenges that she's facing are a lot different. I think there's times where I think, well, she's being a little lazy too, and so I kind of want to have that tough love, but I also got to sit down and ask questions. I got to sit down and really listen. I got to offer some positive input. And I wasn't even aware of this certification, until I got involved in Father's Club. I didn't know there was such a thing. But just to hear about the teen suicides, you hear about more and more and more of that. And, seeing the challenges your kids face, it made me just want to sit down and learn more about this, become more aware myself, and it's helped me just to really be a better communicator.
And Joe, and I appreciate that honesty. I mean, I think you're not alone. It's not natural for dads to maybe come in. We're good at fixing things. We got a problem, we want to go tackle it. But to sit down and connect and converse on some of those topics that are even outside our comfort zone, candidly, that was one of the things I took away is one of the best ways to engage is just to sit down and be present, to put the devices aside, very much focus, and get back to some of the things that we can't lose regardless of how society evolves, which is family, friends, life happens on the rails of relationships, and that happens when we have conversation. Scott?
I think it was very interesting to have 30 dads in the room, and Joe talks about the challenge of communicating with daughters as a father, and I would say there's the similar challenges of communicating with the one-word answer sons as a father that you really have to pry information out of. And I think the beauty of the mental health first aid training was really how practical the content was in terms of simple tips around if you really want to facilitate a dialogue. Sometimes the hardest thing for a child to do is actually look you in the eyes sometime and be honest. And tips like take a car ride, sometimes facilitating better communication honestly when you're driving down the road, because things like having to not make eye contact sometimes fosters more honest and open communication. So as one example of the practical tips that the training really brought to the table, and our instructors did a great job of facilitating exercises that put us into the space of someone struggling with behavioral health or mental health challenges. And I think to me the output of the practicality of the training and how it applies to the different children that we all have the opportunity to raise really was compelling to me, and I think it was a big takeaway for a lot of the dads that attended.
I think the experience for me was being in a room with people with shared issues, shared communication issues, and I think our children, high school, grade school, middle school, college age, for most of us, our points of reference were our parents. How did our parents do things? And I think we've had an acceleration of almost multi-generational with our kids, because, and it's not just cell phones and things like that, it's just they are facing, when I grew up, you didn't talk about alcohol abuse, you didn't talk about drug abuse, you didn't talk about, mental health issues. It was kind of in the quiet corner. It wasn't front and center, and now the awareness is so critical and so important, not just from your own family, but community as well. We've spent the last 20 years, in the workforce promoting financial and physical health wellness, but the mental health wellness, the repercussions on the community are so important. But we got to start with the awareness, and it's pretty easy to kick the can down the road, or whatever cliche term you want to use. But what made me become more self-aware, sharing these ideas and just hearing other people, is this isn't just isolated to a family. It's everybody's responsibility.
Yeah, it is really a community piece on it. And, on that awareness topic, what I would say is, and I don't think we hear this often expressed, you're starting to hear it more and more. Tim DeWeese talks about this a lot. He's taught me this. Mental health director for Johnson County, is we're in a loneliness epidemic. And what's odd about that is we have more connections. We know our connections. I can tell you who my friend is now and who they're not, but we're more disconnected than we've ever been. And that loneliness is creating challenges. Scott, you hit it spot on, which is just having a conversation in a car ride. It's probably some of my most memorable conversations as a young man growing up. Today, we're too busy. Everyone's on their devices within the car. And let's talk a little bit about that from an awareness standpoint, is we're asking ourselves and looking within. We're seeing this causation correlation between some of the elements that are out there. You spoke about social media, technology, those types of things. You mentioned we didn't talk about mental health, those types of things. We know there's a stigma associated with it. It's one of the reasons why I wear this green bracelet, is I want somebody to ask me, what does that mean? And part of attacking a challenge and making it into an opportunity is being able to break down the walls that keep us from talking about it. You all have kind of hinted at it. It's still an uncomfortable thing to talk about. We just don't come up and say, Principal Bacon, how's your mental health today? Hey, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. Share some of your thoughts around those variables that I just mentioned, and maybe how you're looking at things differently.
Well, I'm kind of looking for, as I walk through the school, or I'm just walking the community, I'm just trying to engage more with anyone. I think that's important. Conversation, I think, is important, and I'm more of an extrovert. I'll talk to anyone about anything for any length of time, but getting to talk with people really about anything and insight into anything, you can gauge a lot from what's happening, right? From that conversation, whether they're aloof from you, whether when we're in the schools, talking to those kids that are off in the corner and engaging them in a 2-minute conversation can mean a lot. It doesn't mean there's something going on. It just helps with them knowing that you care, knowing that you saw them and you took a minute to at least engage them for a few seconds. You probably see this all the time, Principal Bacon, there's plenty of kids, and maybe they're just off because they just needed some quiet time, right, to themselves and to get away from the chaos. But I totally understand the device thing, Tom. It's it's something that I talk about with my kids all the time. But it's engaging in conversation with our kids is going to be the number one thing that's going to help all the time. And whether your kids, I think I said this in the thing, your kid may not think you're the cool dad, but hopefully every other kid thinks you are the cool dad, so that they'll have those conversations with you, because it's hard to have it with your own father, I think.
Oh, I couldn't agree more.
I would reiterate that. I think we all have our story, but most people don't know our story. And I think, like you mentioned, just taking the time to engage one another face to face and verbally and have a conversation, whether it's an adult with a student or students between students, I think is a powerful moment in time. Because of social media, I think we've probably gotten away from that, and so we don't know people like we used to. We all have a story, and I think we'd probably be amazed at the story that all of us in this room could share. But we just haven't had the opportunity to interact that way, or taken that opportunity.
Yeah, I think one of the sessions we had in the training was a story. It was a Kevin Hines story, and he's a gentleman who attempted suicide, unfortunately one of the most common ways, which is off of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. And in his story, he talks about the lead up to actually attempting that event, and talks about if someone would have just intervened and asked him, he may have not gone through with it, but no one did. So in my professional life, I have the opportunity to work for a company where I'm exposed to a lot of providers of behavioral health and mental health services. And in that role, I get the opportunity to hear a lot of folks who have been on a journey to recovery tell their story. And all of them talk about just wanting someone to notice and engage. And we just returned from the largest conference where they gather, and those conferences usually include a lot of inspiring stories. And again, we were exposed to stories of recovery where someone did take the time to engage, and it made all the difference on that journey to recovery. So that is really the takeaway of the training, is being able to engage and recognize that the simplest act can alter the course of someone's life if you're willing to make the effort.
Well, and I think I want to the next part of our conversation go right to that. You mentioned stories. We all have a story, and the more you get to know people's stories, you realize we're more alike than not. Our journeys, our chapters may be shaped different, but we all seek some of the same things. We seek community, we seek wellness, happiness, and in that pursuit, we can learn a lot from each other. As you look at when you became mental health first aid certified that day, we all got our certificates. It was a cool picture as we all stood there. What things have happened? What's a story of something that you can either look back on, something that you learned, maybe a conversation that you handled differently because of that? I'll tell you one thing that on that very Kevin Hines story, I know Kevin Hines' story really well. I've had the chance to meet him and hear him speak, and it's very humbling. And a father was out on vacation in San Francisco and sent me a picture of the bridge and sent me a picture of his bracelet that he was wearing with the bridge. And it was a thank you for what we did that day, because he'll now look at everything differently. And I think one of the best things that happens with mental health first aid is our context and our perspective changes, how we have those conversations, how we pause to listen. What's something that you wouldn't mind sharing with us that takeaway, either as you look back or look forward from that moment?
Well, I think the one thing, and I don't mind telling the story because it's I think the stories and our experiences really help people a lot. I've always kind of thought that. So I think one of the things I hope to take away, we talked about getting people help. And there is a stigma, I think, to going to therapy. It's pretty, that's a big jump to take, whether it's your own kid or whether it's yourself, right? So I talk about my experience and as a kid. So I am an ADHD kid. I tell the story of 6th grade of getting the Ritalin pill shoved down my throat. That's a little exaggeration, but it happened. And you know, in 9th grade, going to the doctor and you put your hands when you're going to find out. I'm waiting to become 5'4", so I was waiting for that moment in 9th grade, and I was told, "You're done growing." And when you get bullied for a long time, you just want to get past that stage, right? So what was happening is I was having kind of a moment of, what does this mean, right? So my parents kind of saw that and they put me into therapy, and it was once a month, so it was nothing drastic, but it was someone to talk to who was not my mom or dad, right? Someone who knew nothing about me other than what I was coming there to talk to them about. And what we did was, it was a venting session once a month for me. And I wanted to fight going because it's a stranger, and my goal every time was to not talk. And it was a game for me. I lost every single time because I talked for 55 of the 60 minutes every single time, just about what was going on. And it helped me get past the stage in 9th and 10th grade and learning about that there's a future past high school, that there's something else out there that can really help me. And that's actually helped me all through life, I would say. I always think there's something bigger and better for me than today. So, you know, the stigma of therapy for me is, don't be afraid if you think that your child doesn't want to talk to you, and they need to go get help. It's okay, you know? And it could be for a short period of time. It could be one session. It could be once a month for a year. It could be more than that. And there's nothing wrong with that, because at the end of that session, you come out of it, at least I did, feeling refreshed, feeling like you can go and take that next step that you need to take. And it's amazing.
Chris, that's a powerful story, and that's a gift that you've given us. It takes guts, courage to be able to tell that, because the safe thing is not to tell it. And what's encouraging is the walls are coming down. That conversation may not have happened many years ago, and yet I know there's parents listening right now that are at their crossroads, and that encouragement, I hope, helps you. And that's really what a lot of this podcast and what mental health first aid training is about. How about from another dad? Something that has maybe shaped or edited how you're engaging or thinking.
Well, my story is, I think everybody knows somebody that has suffered from some type of mental health issue or depression. I had a friend that committed suicide not too long ago, several years ago, that was complete shock to me. He wasn't like a real close friend, but it's somebody that when I got the phone call, I was just blown away. And of course, that's the biggest fear, right? We suffer, people suffer from mental health issues or depression, and hopefully they can get help, but the worst case scenario is they take their own life. And then my wife, her father committed suicide when she was 12. And so then I got this fear that, there's, that's a hereditary thing that runs in your family. And so going back to just stop talking to somebody, something I got out of that certification was to sit down with my kids and say, hey, I know it's hard to talk to mom and dad sometimes about these issues, or if you are, feeling a certain way. And I really want them to sit down and just and list 2 or 3 people and get them to commit to that. Hey, if you are ever feeling this way, let's list 2 or 3 people that you feel like you could go to right now and just talk to. Maybe it's not a counselor or something like that, but just a friend, a friend's mom, a friend's dad, something that I hope my daughter's friends would come to me at some point, right? And I want them to just list a few people out and commit to me that, hey, if you are feeling that way, go talk to them.
Joe, that's powerful. I know in my own family, we have a word that we use that means stop everything, we need to talk. Let's go grab a cup of coffee, let's go somewhere. I hadn't thought about what are other people that if you can't talk to me that you can go talk them to. That's really cool. I'm going to do that this weekend to make sure that they know, hey, these are people that you can go talk to. How about one more thought?
Two levels of things that have happened for me since certification, and one was, your encouragement, Tom. Went home, posted on social media the certificate, and I was contacted by two different, one a rural school district in Nebraska and a local college here, private college. Administrator there said, Scott, can you tell me more about this? We don't have enough people. We deal with college age kids all the time. We don't have enough people certified at all in this area, and we need to do something soon. And the rural school district was, they don't have the funds. They have their counselors and things, but they need to get more awareness within the school districts. And so I was able to share the mental health first aid websites and get them in touch with that.
That's awesome.
And then on the personal level, it is really, lit the fire under me to engage in talking with our children about anxiety. I'm trying to get a better understanding, and that's not the right word, because what I learned from the training was I'm never going to understand how anxiety, because I'm not in their shoes, but the more awareness I can have, anxiety is such a personal issue, because I grew up in a sports world where you needed to have we were always told you need a little bit of anxiety so you can play better, so you could be at the top of your game. Well, that means different things to different people and how it affects them. And so just in the last few weeks, I've had more conversations with our girls than I've ever had on this topic. And it's not that they didn't feel they couldn't talk to me before, but it was just, they went their way, I went my way. And so it's kind of purposefully have been a discussion topic that, I'm just so glad and I would encourage others that whatever it takes to get you more involved, more aware, more engaged, do whatever that is.
Well, and that's cool, because you just gave what some of the training was, using the tools, assessing, listening, giving encouragement, helping connect people with the tools. I mean, that's algae. You just nailed that piece of it, and that's part of the takeaway. Well, we'll begin to bring this in for a landing. I'm going to go to Scott Green first, and just can you, for those who don't know what mental health first aid is, kind of give a quick brief what it is, what it isn't maybe, and why someone might want to consider becoming mental health first aid certified?
Sure. So let me start with what it isn't. It isn't a mandatory session to come in and share information or experiences you're uncomfortable sharing. It's a voluntary session that actually just teaches you how to be more conscientious and practical around assessing folks who may be struggling and having challenges. So, Tom, you mentioned algae, and I think that was really the takeaway. That's an acronym for the steps to go through when you find yourself in a situation that you fear that there may be someone who's contemplating harm to themselves. And really the training is about how to handle that appropriately and how to be more aware and conscientious, and then when you find yourself in that position, to take the right steps. So you alluded to it earlier. Most men want to jump to, I got it, let's solve it. And in many of these situations, that approach is not always that effective. So there's practical steps, assessing for risk of suicide or harm, and the training is about going through exercises that teach you the practicality and the right steps on how to be straightforward about that.
Yeah.
And simply ask the question, which is really uncomfortable. And we found that out in the class for many. But you get through it, and it's amazing. The more you find yourself doing it, the more comfortable you become with that dialogue and conversation. So I think the other thing that comes out of it is just an awareness to listen non-judgmentally. So much of our society these days has drifted towards reactionary judgment, and I think this session is a real reminder on civil discourse in general, but also in particular of not being judgmental to those who might find themselves in situations where they're struggling.
Scott, thank you. You know, it was a 9-hour course. It was a full day. It was a good day. I mean, a lot of what you're listening to here or maybe watching here, very similar. The role playing was awkward but good because it forced you into those situations and it makes you more prepared. You know, I forget in sports, that's why we train, so that when you're there, you are more comfortable with it. I think, you know, coming in for a landing here, what I would encourage everyone, there's a lot of great things happening in the community. Some of you are aware of the student-led effort called Zero Suicide, and it's really teens leading and impacting change. And we're going to include these in the show notes, links and resourcing material. I applaud them. They're teaching us. It's really odd at times when the parent becomes the student, and I really applaud the Zero Suicide initiative, the team that's out there. They're on Twitter, very encouraging. Tim DeWeese, I've mentioned, Johnson County Mental Health Director, doing a lot in our community to make a big impact. BV Well, got a lot of great training coming. There's some training coming up that I'll be attending and really hitting on those wellness topics. And then, of course, there's mental health first aid, an easy way to be able to go out there. And you, as you heard today, we all changed from that course. One, we got to know each other better, but we're also tackling things and looking at things and maybe we didn't do the same before, and you heard that in the stories. You know, what I'd like to hear at the end of that day, Principal Bacon, we ended with you and kind of, you were gracious enough to kind of tell us what this means to you. And before I give a closing thought, I wanted you to share what this means to you. Why is this an important topic? What can we, those listening on the podcast, what can we be doing to help you and our educators right now? Because it, in a very odd way, is the epicenter of our community.
Right. Well, I'd first say that in my 15 years as principal at Blue Valley High School, I've been blessed with a community that is incredibly supportive, and we have a parent-teacher organization that's absolutely second to none. And I think that the evolution of the Fathers Club has added another layer, and in this case really tackled some issues that I think, you know, even as a community, we were at a loss to know how to deal with. And I feel like through the Fathers Club, we have gained access to some tools and some conversation and some relationships with one another that, like you mentioned earlier, is starting to tear down the wall and the stigma around mental health. And, you know, I think there's a glaring need within our community and within our society to address this issue. And I know I walked away at the end of that day with some tools that I felt I could utilize both personally and professionally. And so it was a tremendous opportunity for me. And I might add this too, you know, it's always interesting that when you get a group of adults together, it's a challenging environment when those adults don't necessarily know each other, to get to a point where there's an atmosphere of trust. And that takes a while. You get a group of men who don't know each other, that's even more complicated.
That takes forever.
Yes. And I will tell you, when I left that day, I sensed an atmosphere of trust in that room that was palpable. And, you know, that's what left an impression with me, is we can recreate this experience many times over. And for the Fathers Club, I think you've tapped into something here that will have a tremendous influence and can have a tremendous influence on our community, and quite frankly could be replicated across our country. So I appreciate the involvement of our community, and in particular our fathers who are part of our Fathers Club.
You know, and if you're a dad out there and you're wondering how to get involved, Principal Bacon just described what Fathers Club's about. It's about community. You're not alone. You heard each of the guys sitting here talking today about the opportunities and challenges before them, and community is a big part of it. It's also about connection. It's about coming together, very purposeful, mindful, intentional. That's what we did that Saturday. It's really about collaboration. You know, you may have heard about the chicken biscuits and handing those out. You heard heard the story from Chris in here. You know what? I remember the first day I was there and handing out chicken biscuits. It was awkward. No one who wants chicken biscuit. But when you start, it was really about, hey, how's your day going? Glad to see you. And it was really about a bunch of dads saying, you matter right now. That was the difference, and that's what Fathers Club is all about. That's what this podcast is all about. In closing, I just want to thank the students here today, the CAPS program. You guys are amazing, really cool. You have helped us facilitate this in a big way. Thank you. I want to thank each of our participants today. It's not easy. There's a lot of things going on. You had every reason not to be here today, but you made reason to be here today. And most importantly, you didn't just share your thoughts, you shared your heart. And that's what makes change sustainable. And I want to thank you for doing that. And if you want to learn more or get involved, we'll include the links in the show notes, or just come talk to one of us. Find us. We're out there. We'll have the conversation. But most important right now, I want to pause. If you're struggling, finding yourself in need of help, maybe you're the one who's saying, I need help. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is an incredible group of people. I know them. I've gotten to talk with them who want to help. And you can reach out to them right now at 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255. Or you can text their crisis text line by texting TALK to 741-741. Text them TALK to 741-741. This group of dads here, we all got lots of things going on in life. We coach. We got jobs going on. We're figuring it out. And if you're a dad out there, you want to figure it out too, hey, we encourage you. Give us a listen. Let us know what topics we can talk about. Most important, we'd love to connect. We'd love to have that community for you to get involved that's out there. If we all step forward, if we're all willing to lean in a little bit, the statistics that I mentioned in the beginning will change. We'll have a ripple of goodness that will provide not only wellness and resiliency, but our community fundamentally will experience the goodness of people saying, you matter right here, right now. Lives will be saved, awareness will change, and wellness will become a reality. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to talking with you at the next podcast.